The Vancouver real estate market has been leaning towards buyers now for quite some time. Sellers have been now dropping their prices. Homes are still sitting on the market for quite some time. Inventory sky high, and buyers are still confused, not knowing when and how to act. Within all the chaos, I'm going to break it down in this video how this is still a great opportunity for you as a buyer. We're going to look at buyer psychology as well as the seller's psychology and just what's been going on between the two parties in this last year in the real estate market to give you guys a better sense really on the psychology side of things. So stick around to the end of this video. We're going to get into some cool stuff right now. Start with the facts here in Vancouver. Let's look at the detached housing market, for example. Now, year over year since last September, we're seeing over a 6% decrease in sales prices from last September to this September. We're moving into October now. So you're seeing a constant, steady decline in sale prices. For example, days on market are longer. The total inventory, we're seeing 36 to 38% higher than 10-year seasonal average. So as for a buyer, you adding all these things up together, days on market, prices are falling, and total inventory sky high. You're thinking this is an easy market for a buyer to really get in there and just, have at it. But for a lot of people, it still feels broken, it still feels chaotic. You're hearing different things, especially when you listen to the media. You're hearing, it's doom and gloom and the market is just continuing to crash. This kicks into a lot of psychological things if you're a buyer, because at the end of the day, now buyers are thinking worst case scenario. We've heard it in the past. I've talked about it in other videos that if you're a seller, you have to do two things real well: present your house very, very well and price it very sharply. Now, we're going to talk about the seller side of things, but from a buyer's perspective, if you're putting yourself in buyer's shoes, they're looking for the best value they can, and they will pick apart a property with a fine tooth comb every single time, and they will move on to the next property. But we're still seeing transactions, and the fall is seeing a bit of an uptick. There's a little more action, rightfully so. We've had a completely slow, dead summer. The spring wasn't really good. The first half of the year wasn't really good. We have seen a little more uptick in activity now. Seeing interest rates sort of leveling off. People are sort of saying, okay, we're sort of knowing what to expect. We feel a little more confident where we are here as far as interest rates are concerned, and that's a big one. I got another interest rate announcement coming up at the end of this month in October here. So we'll see what happens with that. We'll talk about that in another video. But when we're looking at the buyer's side and saying, okay, what is happening? Why are we still so many days on market with a lot of this inventory? It comes down to the psychological aspect for a buyer. So buyers have leverage more than ever in this market. Days on market are longer. Inventory is sky high, 36 to 38% above the 10-year seasonal average. And prices are continuing to drop. So where are we sitting, right? I'm going to pull you up an example here. Here's a simple days on market for you guys. Here's a home in East Van. This property here, East Vancouver, Hastings Sunrise neighborhood. Gorgeous neighborhood, very desirable neighborhood. And you're looking at a home here priced at 2.150. Price dropped. Originally, it was listed at about 2.3. So they dropped the price. Now, again, this is where we're looking at skewed statistics, right? Don't believe everything you see, because when we look at the days on market, first of all, we have 150,000 price drop, days on market. So this was basically relisted and shown as a new property. So here's a property that you say, okay, we've got 150,000 price drop, days on market, 43 days on market. Now, the problem with that is, this property is actually, because I can go in on the back end of things, this property was actually been on the market well over 5 months. So put 5 months in there, 4 or 5 months plus another 43 days. That's your true days on market with this property. Now it's only showing 43. That is becoming more common because as we do price drops, a lot of times what will happen is the listing gets pulled down and then it gets regenerated as a new listing. Once you do a price drop, the property is remarketed and so on and so forth. So days on market become very, very skewed. So even if you think, okay, days on market are, pretty decent, we're looking at say 45 days on market for this one, that's actually almost 200 and something days on market. So that is skewed, right? So, but as a buyer, let's talk about a buyer and let's talk about a buyer's psychology here and what this all means. We are having continuously steady price drops. So this is where buyer's psychology comes into play. The fear of overpaying in this market. That's a complete 180 from what we saw just a few years ago. What was going on a few years ago? It was what people refer to as FOMO, the fear of missing out, right? You heard it, and I want to hear in the comments from you guys if you were involved in that market as a buyer, and comment and let me know what you felt like, because the common thread was frustration, right? Buyers, so many buyers continuously missing out on properties that they wanted, and they want it badly. And a lot of them were end users, right? This was a home that they were like, they could see themselves living in from, you know, till whatever, the brand new condo, a nice detached home. But you're competing against so many offers. So the strategies were completely different. It was, how much are we going to go in over asking? What subjects are we not going to include? A lot of times we're including no subjects. You better be ready to go, and we got to make a decision within the next couple of hours, or somebody else will. That was a completely different psychological buyer than today's buyer. Today's buyer is looking for absolute value, but they're also, the biggest fear is overpaying. So as we've seen prices come down slowly at the beginning of this year, sellers were just stuck. And we're going to touch on sellers, but on the buyer standpoint, they don't want to overpay, and they don't want to overpay by even minimal amount of money. If they think $10,000 or $5,000 is going to be too much, they'll walk away and they'll go look for something else. The reason being, we're on such a downward trajectory that they say, listen, if I get this place at this price, if it continues to go down, I'll be okay. Even an end user, it's a psychological thing. You don't want to feel like you're buying something today at kind of the peak pricing right now, and in 6 months later, you are way below what you paid. And then you start thinking, how long is it going to take for this to recover, for me even to break, even if I say wanted to list on market, even 3 or 4 years down the road, right? As we know in this market, and just kind of being involved in the market every single day, we really, this markets recover, but it takes a long time to do so. And there's still a lot of the unknown happening right now. So as you're a buyer, that's what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'm not going to overpay. There's no way I'm going to get caught in that. So a lot of buyers are really scared sometimes to even pull the trigger, right? It's great to say, listen, let's get all our ducks in a row. Let's get pre-approved. Let's do this, do that. But if there's just this inkling of like, I'm just a little too tight, this is stretching it too far, in this type of market, they will not do it. A real quick story for you guys. I was working with a buyer previously that was a first time buyer. We've been looking for 2 or 3 months right now, and they're a first time buyer, and they're just new to the process and everything like that. And their biggest thing for me was they just weren't ready. And they weren't ready because they weren't sure where the market's going. Even if we show them what's been selling in the last 30, 60, 90 days, and that this place checks all their boxes, the biggest thing for them is they've just been super hesitant to dive in. They have, their rent's affordable right now, and they're saying, I just don't know if I want to jump into the market right now with all this confusion. And really, it is a psychological thing. So, even if you talk with them and say, listen, there's a lot of benefits to owning a home. It's a good time for you because, you have basically your pick of the litter. And but it comes down to where they want to pay. They have a certain budget. Maybe sellers aren't willing to come down from last year's pricing, for example. And even though we're seeing that a little bit, they're just not ready to go. So this particular couple, we're still working together. We're still on the hunt for homes, and I think we'll get to that point. But right now, for them, it's not something you can force on people, especially when again, it's the biggest financial decision in majority of the people. watching this in daily day-to-day life are going to make. So it's one of those things, you guide them, you try to help them and say, look, this is where we're at in this market. And essentially it comes up to the buyer, right? You have to feel comfortable. This is not the kind of this is not something that me or any agent really should be pushing on somebody. You're there to guide, help them, give them advice, and really be that person they can trust. But at the end of the day, it's a decision that, listen, at the end that you want to be able to sleep well knowing that they're comfortable in their decision. So it's very psychological. It's always an emotional decision. We're in that type of market now where even though you think it's such a buyer's market, really that's the reason why we're still seeing a lot of these houses on the market. And again, it's going to bring into the next point about the sellers. So why do sellers feel confused sometimes in a market like this, and really a pretty unprecedented market that we've seen in quite some time? Where do the sellers come to play with the confusion and the psychological aspect of it? Well, there's really two big things. The biggest thing is, especially we saw at the beginning of the year, is sellers are trying to hang on to last year's prices and even prior year's prices. I just mentioned the chaos we've seen in the past few years ago, and really, as time flies, we all know how quickly and how chaotic our lives are. Time flies by, and really, 3 years ago for a lot of people feels like 3 days ago, 3 weeks ago. So when you, especially when you're not involved in the market, when you know you haven't been thinking about buying or selling, but everybody remembers that chaos, even if you weren't in the thick of it. You heard it on the news. People, probably somebody at work was talking about it. So to now that you're like, hey, now I want to sell my house. Uh, I remember realtors coming knock on my door every 2 weeks, wanting to give me top tier pricing. What happened to that? So it's not the seller's fault. It's just honestly, it comes down to what they're remembering. And they say, no, well, what happened to my house that should have been worth, it was 2.2 a couple years ago. Shouldn't it be worth at least that now? And we're in a market where like we know that it's nowhere near those peak prices, but sellers have been hanging on to that. And the other big thing is sellers will revert back to the old adage of BC assessment and tying that into the market. And they'll look that up and say, look, this is what my BC assessment is worth. And we all know that comes out, that's done in July, then it gets sent out to you at the beginning of the year. So if we're looking at the assessment, we're in October right now. We're looking at as a BC assessment that's over 15 months old, and really, it's not correlating to the market, and especially right now. So a lot of them will revert back to that BC assessment and say, okay, maybe the price that you've come up with as an agent, might not make a lot of sense to them right now. So they'll revert back to that BC assessment and say, well, can we get it close to the assessment? And it really has no bearing in this market right now. So those are the couple of confusion things. And then what happens is just a lot of frustration between buyers and sellers. And then it comes to a point in negotiation a lot of times where they fall apart because they're just too far apart. Buyers are scared that the bottom is nowhere near, and sellers are hanging on to these prices. They feel like they've missed out on that peak. They feel like, man, if I would have listed last year, I was ready to go last year, we didn't do it. Man, I think we lost out on 100 grand. Or if I would have sold 3 years ago, we would have made an extra 300 grand. That's the psychological aspect. Instead of being like, wait a second, I'm selling, I'm going to market right now. What is today? You can't worry about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago. It's what is going on in this market today. And, we've had such a 180 with the 2022 and 2021 post COVID era of, you went from FOMO, fear of missing out for buyers, to now I don't know where the bottom is going to be. That's quite the trade-off. I mean, we're at that. I mean, that's two real different ends of the spectrum here. So when you flip it to sellers, it's almost the same thing, right? Where sellers are thinking, man, what could have been? So, and what I would say, and so that's all good. And then what I will say to sellers that are, because I'm dealing with a client right now who is a seller. So if you're selling and buying in this market, then don't get too caught up on that. That's when I'd say, look, you got to be more aggressive with your pricing here and get ahead of the market, because we are in a downward market. So get ahead of it. Let's not, even if we're looking at the last 30 days here in the market, let's price where in the next 30, where do you think pricing is going to go? Let's go ahead and price it there because we know what days on market are like. If you price right now, kind of the top, in 30 days, you're going to be overpriced. And then we're chasing. If you're on the buy side as well, that is where you want to be because you have to think, because I'm dealing with sellers too. They still want top dollar and they want the deal on the buy side. Well, you got to kind of try to put yourself on the opposite shoes, right? Like if you're a seller, put yourself in the buyers. If you're a buyer, put yourself in the seller's shoes. If we're selling your house and you're making an offer, what do you think that seller wants, right? So you got to try to align. But again, it's I want the deal because there's deals, but I also want last year's pricing. So sellers, there's confusion there, and it's natural to feel that way because again, it's what could have been compared to, okay, I have to sell or I want to just make a change. The seller, one of the sellers I'm working with right now is just they have a detached house, nice neighborhood, but just not for them. They want a little more space and want a little more land. So that's kind of the trade-off we're looking at right now. But again, you got to know you're going to make it up on one of the sides. It's all relevant because you're selling in the same market and you're buying in the same market. Here's the good news if you're a buyer. This is a rare moment for leverage. Homes are not flying off the market and sellers are motivated, but it takes the proper strategy to get it done. So, what I mean by that is if you're a buyer in this market, know your numbers, track your price trends and comparable sales. You don't want to be one of those buyers that just says, look, let's just go and look at 8 or 10 properties and lowball them all. Right now, most of the buyers that we're looking at are end users, meaning that you want to be in a situation where you're looking for the home that you want. So go in with a strategy. If you're going to come in, yes, you have an opportunity to come under asking. You have an opportunity to come in with no other offers. But at the same time, you can't come in so low that it just doesn't even open up a conversation. Your goal is to get the best value, but also create that dialogue going with the sellers. They want to come back. They want to negotiate with you. So come in with the proper strategy. And that means know your comparables, know your price trends, and then be ready to go. And that's going to enable you to win in this market. What they want to, if they, if we're calling it a buyer's market, but, take that unknown psychological aspect and thinking, look, where is the price going to go? Are we going to, I don't want to overpay for property. Come in with a proper strategy, right? If you see what's happening in the last 30, okay, well then strategize that to your advantage and then come in with an offer that you think, okay, this will create and open up some dialogue and try to get aligned here and get into it on hopefully an opportunity for yourself to be the end user of a property that you love. So why does Vancouver overall, the housing market feel broken? Because at the end of the day, human psychology lags behind reality, right? Buyers hesitate, sellers overprice, and there's just not enough alignment. But again, if you're a seller, think about today's market, think about pricing strategically in today's market, present your house like a show home and price it sharply. Ideally, get ahead of the market so you're not chasing down the market. Buyers, come up with a strategy that aligns with your budget after you get pre approved and stick with that budget. And if you're planning long term, then it is a very good time. We don't want to look back as a buyer and say, man, in 2025, it was such a soft market. There was no competition. I can get in relatively, at a good price. Maybe I'm not at the bottom. I haven't, quote unquote, timed the market perfectly like everyone tries to do. But I'm sitting here in 2030 and man, that was a good decision. It's a lot better in this market, guys. I'm telling you right now to go around and shop and try to get something that you want than it was a few years ago in that absolute chaos. So this is just a quick video, guys, on the art of psychology, if you want to call it, but it's really interesting because we're really in that market. And like I said, sales are continuing to drop. People are, home prices are continuing to drop as well. But if you're interested in just kind of setting up a strategy, what something might look like, guys, drop me a DM, shoot me a message, give me a call. I'm always free to talk, and we could just walk through the process together. So anytime, all the info is in the description. That's it, guys. That's it for today. See you guys in the next video.